Hello everyone, welcome to the Grumpy Surfer podcast. I'm your host, Ads Lyson, and I'm the Grumpy Surfer. Well, in light of this week's International Women's Day, my guest this week is a Rodger Gracie black belt. She also is a yoga instructor. She produces personal training programs for people to do at home and a nutritionist. But her background was in hospitality. She decided to ditch that and follow a dream of being a martial arts instructor and a personal trainer. So, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with a very inspirational lady, Joanna Ziobronowicz. Joanna Ziobronowicz, welcome to the podcast. I said that right, didn't I?
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
Amazing. 3 questions. First one is, how are you? Second one is, where are you? And the third one is, have you trained today?
Oh, wow. I didn't see that coming. I'm very well today. Thank you. I'm just outside of London. And I have not trained yet. If yoga counts, then I have trained. If you're talking about jiu-jitsu, I haven't done jiu-jitsu today.
Any form of training is training, right? A bit of mobility, a bit of stretching, it's all good for you, right?
Absolutely. So I did an hour.
You've only just started doing yoga recently, haven't you? Is that right?
I've been doing it for a while. Actually started, first time I started, I was a purple belt suffering from an injury. That's how I got into it. But I actually started going more into depth with yoga about 2.5 years ago.
How do you find that? Because I suffer through surfing and in jiu-jitsu as well with lower back issues, and I find my attention span trying to hold a full class quite taxing. So over the lockdown period, I basically just went onto YouTube and did a few follows of a few sequences, and then just took the best bits and just made my own thing up. Really, that's all I did.
Absolutely. No, that's the right thing to do. I guess a group session, it's difficult to tailor to individuals because we're all suffering from different kinks, different injuries and problem areas. So it is quite difficult to design a class that would suit all people. If you're in a group session, say a Virgin Active, they have all the different levels from beginners to advanced. So it really does help to understand your body, so to understand the mechanics of the body, and which areas you want to actually trigger, or you want to relax in your practice. So getting to know more about yoga will actually help you to go into the right pose and find the flows that will work for you. Another thing that I find extremely interesting is the different types of yogas, different styles, and the different teachers as well. So I find some teachers I absolutely cannot listen to, whilst others I absolutely adore and love. They're my number one teachers that I always follow, and I love their routine. So I think you have to gear it towards your individual needs, but also towards your preferences. So, what kind of music you like, what kind of instructors you enjoy working out with. So all these have really a lot of bearings. If you choose hatha yoga, maybe too draining for some, whilst yin yoga might be the more appropriate option. So there are a wide range of options within yoga. So it's really hard to talk about yoga just as a practice of sun salutation. It's too wide a topic. So I would say you just have to find your own style for the purpose that you want to have it for. And the beauty of it is that once you learn the basic principles, you can then tailor it whichever way you want. So
I've been trying to open my mind a little bit too, because the place where I've got my Bowen Technique clinic, they run a variety of yoga practices, Ashtangi, there's loads of them. There's about 5 or 6 different ones, and Pilates classes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, each one is different. So every time when I've got a client and I go in, sometimes there's a woman called Nikki playing like a little organ and doing some breath work and doing some chanting, which from my personal perspective, I'm a very black and white person that I find it hard to engage with a little bit. But then you've got some then you've got some other guys that just turn up and they just go through the flows, and they don't really go into like the holistic side of it, which the first class I ever went to, I actually couldn't stop laughing at the back of the class because the woman was really into it, and it didn't float well with me, I don't think.
That's exactly why a lot of people are being put off from yoga as well, because of the mantras that they don't necessarily, understand or understand the purpose of it. So it can come across as a little bit, shamanic like. So I absolutely understand. That's why probably my first choice was vinyasa because of the fluidity and the flow, and it was a little bit more energetic. So for me, it was something way more challenging than all the relaxation poses. So yeah, vinyasa and ashtanga I would probably advise to all jiu-jitsu practitioners. I find uh, general yoga practice a bit boring or static. Yeah, vinyasa will get you going.
Are you a yoga instructor yourself?
Yes, I did a course, and actually, it wasn't until I did the course that I got to understand it a little bit more, and it massively helped me with my own practice. So, actually, if someone doesn't even consider teaching yoga, doing a teacher's course can be extremely helpful. And there's a bunch of good courses that are very affordable, especially over COVID. There's been some online courses going on, and you actually have amazing teachers teaching online. So it's not a hindrance to do an online course at all. Obviously, it's not the same, but you do learn the principles of anatomy or certain poses that you shouldn't be doing due to your injuries or problems that may be ongoing with knees, especially from jiu-jitsu. So it's been extremely helpful, and I'm really glad I've done it because now I can actually help clients and students to better tailor these sessions for them. So yeah, big eye opener for me to do the course.
I feel like I should do something like that just to broaden my horizons a little bit. But I feel that my leather hamstrings and lower back and glutes and that I should be stretching every single day, which I don't. I'm one of those people that do what I say and not what I do, really.
That's absolutely fine, as long as it inspires you to do something for the body, and as soon as you see the benefits, you will want to do it. You have that intrinsic motivation. Once you see the results, you will want to do it every morning, even for 10 minutes, because you will realize how good it feels in the body. So I think that was the changing point for me, because I learned a lot of breath work as well, a lot of stuff I had not done in regular yoga practices, that helped me massively, even with breathing and jiu-jitsu and combat sports. It was a game changer for me. So I took that bit as well, away from yoga and into my routine, daily routine.
So, as well as being a yoga instructor, you're a black belt under in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu under Rodger Gracie. Is it Rodger or is
Correct.
it Rodger? I never
Depends
really.
which part of the world you're in, I guess. In Brazil, I believe it's pronounced Rodger because of the first letter in Portuguese. It's pronounced as H. For people in maybe in England that struggle to pronounce it, it's easier to just say Roger.
I never really understood that because you've got Hoist Gracie and
Hmm.
Roll. Well, Rolls is rollers, isn't it? But all the R's
Right.
are like ha.
Yeah, the H is the correct way to pronounce it in Portuguese, but then there's actually a reasoning behind why all these names start with the letter R, because it's phonetically very strong. So when were naming fighters or potential fighters, future to be, they wanted strong resonance. So phonetically, these names were designed to appear or sound strong.
Okay, every day's a learning day, right?
It is.
So, as well as being a black belt in jiu-jitsu, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you've got a few other things going on as well. So, you teach self-defense, you do nutritional plans, you do some exercise planning as well. So, it's all incorporated into like one business model.
Yes, I've tried quite a few, and I found that a holistic approach works really best. So even when I work with a student, whether it's just for jujitsu, I don't like to focus solely on jujitsu, but they give them some tips and cues on how can strengthen the body or how they can relax the body. Because as a jujitsu practitioner, you are aware that jujitsu on its own it's not really going to be the most healthy sport that he can choose. So then to incorporate other things into jiu-jitsu practice are extremely important, for longevity and for just general well-being. So and stretching and just regular strength training, I believe they're part and parcel of any sport, should be part and parcel of any sport, especially combat sports.
Is that one of the reasons why you started doing this, is because, you found that you had something to put back into the jiu-jitsu community through your experiences, and that's why you went along those lines?
Exactly that. It was my personal experience that led me to that realization that it needs to be somehow incorporated. And if I'm not working one-to-one with a client, at least I will guide them towards the right solutions, where they can seek help and, help themselves.
It's quite interesting because you've actually took a big change in direction with your life. Like I said, I've done a little bit of research. So you've got a master's degree in linguistics and psychology, and also a degree in hospitality as well. So is that where you originally started from? And then you decided that, what made you change your mind to, just get rid of that and go your own path?
I wasn't sure when I was 19 what I wanted to do, but I love travel. So I enrolled on a BA course to do tourism and hospitality. And then after that, I decided I want to do something else. I went to study linguistics. And once I graduated from linguistics, I decided I didn't want to do it for life. So I treated it more as a hobby, like most people, I think. They don't really stick with their degrees and change their paths. So that's exactly what happens. And jiu-jitsu was always kind of on the side, like a hobby. That just happened to grow and become part of my life, and such a big part of my life. I actually decided just to switch gears completely and just live and breathe the jiu-jitsu lifestyle.
Let's have a little bit of background from you then. So where were you born and grew up, and how did you get into martial arts itself?
I grew up in Poland, and this is where I actually started my martial arts journey. Started with kickboxing when I was a teenager, and actually I was just on a search of the ultimate, of the best fighting style. So I've done quite a bit of Krav Maga, capoeira, all sorts of things, just to find out which style was the one that was suited for me. Because I didn't necessarily enjoy broken noses or any massive injuries like in Thai boxing. I decided Jiu-Jitsu was the softest version, but yet a very effective one for me to maintain for perhaps a little bit longer than other styles. While I still enjoy other styles like boxing or kickboxing, I treat it as a hobby rather than as a competitive sport, whereas Jiu-Jitsu was probably the safest, also the most challenging in terms of the complexity of the sport itself. I decided to stay with Jiu-Jitsu, and I think when I was 19 or 20, I left and I came to the UK to train at the Gracie Academy, and it just happened to be that I overstayed for 15 years. So that's
That's a nice way of putting it, isn't it? So when did you actually start doing jiu-jitsu? Did you say 17, 18 years old?
I think I was 19.
So
Yeah.
did you find the training environment? Because I can imagine, jiu-jitsu, that time ago now, how long you've been training for now? For a while. So
Yeah, it's been a while. Don't want to say it.
No,
Don't tell
because it
people
gives
how
your
old
age
I am.
away then. During the earlier days, particularly in the UK, I could imagine it was quite a male-heavy, dominant practice. Really, there weren't that many people doing jiu-jitsu, and you can imagine, especially when you look at the way the UFCs and MMA's developed over the last 10, 15 years with women's MMA especially. The grappling was, like I said, quite male dominated. So how did you feel with that, and were there many girls training when you started?
I actually never really had a problem with that. I didn't find it intimidating in any way because most people were nice. My introduction to jiu-jitsu was quite pleasant, I have to say. It wasn't scary. It wasn't a scary experience at all. I was lucky, I guess, because I knew the instructor, had a couple of friends around, so it wasn't that overwhelming for me. But definitely for some females, I felt like it was difficult to stay because they didn't necessarily have training partners. they were in their weight division, and it was hard on their bodies as well. So there was definitely a physical and a psychological aspect. Females not maybe lasting as long as majority of men in the sport, but I think it's always going to be male dominated. But the ratio may be a little bit lifted towards like more females in the sport, but I think because of the popularity itself, it's growing so fast, so rapidly, that just the numbers are going up, both for males and females. And then hence that's why we see so many females in the sport, which is amazing. Back in the days, I had maybe one girl in the dojo with me. Right now, it's more like 50. So it's crazy, depending on the gym, obviously. But you'll have a good 20 girls in the, a decent sized dojo, I guess. So that's a huge shift.
Here's a question for you. So back in during that time, and you knew what you knew now, what would you advise to coaches? Like, for instance, myself, I've just started a little academy that I want to grow, because, like I said, there's a distinct lack of grappling and jiu-jitsu around where I live, especially sort of like a 5 to 10 mile radius. That's where I've started something up. What advice would you give to somebody like me who has just primarily got men coming through the door? How would you advise to try and get that so I get more women or girls through the door as well?
I think there are a couple of ways how you can attract more female audience into the gym, and one of them is definitely a female-only designated classes, whether it's jiu-jitsu or self-defense, where they have the space to just train with other females. Another way is organizing certain workshops, and again, it could be jiu-jitsu, but more towards self-defense as well. And I feel that attracts a lot of women who don't necessarily want to start with grappling per se, but want to explore jiu-jitsu also as a self-defense system. But at the end of the day, as an instructor, I think you are in charge of what kind of clientele you're going to be attracting. And the most important factor is to make a very fun and safe environment in the gym. Because once this happens, people naturally feel that vibe and will want to participate in the classes. So it's what kind of people are training and how they are treating other women training is going to be crucial for them to want to be there. But definitely ladies only classes are the way to go. I've been doing them pretty much everywhere in every gym I worked. And we had a big transition from girls just wanting to try it out, then just doing regular ladies classes, and actually then ending up in the mixed classes because they felt like it was a little bit too early for them to come and grapple wrestle with bigger people with males. So yeah, much less intimidating. Once they started to feel more and more comfortable, then they would transition. So we had quite a few, I've seen quite a few women do that, make that transition from ladies only to mixed classes and mixed group.
I think there's been a massive explosion in women's grappling and jiu-jitsu over the last 5 years. You see a lot of the very high level guys now, on things like EBI and Polaris. And I've watched Fionn go through, ADCC, and she did super well in 2019. Unfortunately, she hurt her elbow in an armbar, but I think it's growing exponentially, and it's really good to see. And I can correlate and compare this to women's surfing as well, because I find watching women's competition and sort of like the exhibition matches and women's surfing a lot more entertaining than males sometimes, purely for the fact that it's a lot more fluid. There's a little bit more technique involved. It almost kind of takes away that strength element, and then you're seeing all of those practices and those techniques that are coached in gyms, and I think that's amazing to see, really.
It's so interesting you should say that. I absolutely agree. I didn't realize in surfing was the same case. That's good to know, interesting to find out. But definitely, I think females are obviously, when they start just to practice, they have to learn more of a technique aspect of the sport to be able to survive in the environment. So naturally they will be, I think, again, generalizing a little bit probably, but yeah, they tend to use less sheer strength, but more focus on mobility and technique. So that's why these measures are probably a little bit more perhaps more fast paced. and more fluid, like you mentioned.
I mean, you still get the matches like Mackenzie Dern and Gabby Garcia. I mean, I still love going watching. I'm watching. You know, it's almost like a Jack and the Beanstalk sort of esque situation there, isn't it? And
Yeah.
yeah, it's great when you see things like that, because it really kind of puts the art that you practice into reality, so to speak, because you know yourself, you get taught, especially from the Gracies, that the idea of jiu-jitsu is a smaller, weaker person is supposed to be able to use leverage and technique to overcome a larger, stronger opponent. And I think when you see that spectacle actually in front of you on a screen or in person during competition, I think it puts it all into perspective.
Absolutely. This was actually one of my favorite matches of all times. It does put things into perspective. So for anyone listening if you haven't watched it, please watch that fight.
So how are you finding coaching and teaching at Hodges Place it's Richmond, isn't it?
At the moment, yes, I am predominantly based in Richmond at a club called Elevate, which used to be part of Gracie Academy. And we have a lot of females as well. So I'm really particularly interested in obviously attracting more females into the sport through my classes, but I teach mixed classes as well. So I find it also extremely empowering to be able as a female to teach male students, because it doesn't happen in every gym. So it is very empowering, not just for myself but for other people to to see that, because I think it's important to be able to show that women can teach as well. So yeah, it's been going really well. Now that we out of COVID and we can back to training, starting to train for competition, starting to build the team. So it's been going really well. Thank you.
Well, you kind of built a name for yourself through competition, and you won the Worlds in 2017 as a brown belt. How did you find the preparation for that? And did you go to the Worlds, with a team that helped you along as well?
Yes, for me, it's crucial to have a team behind me. I find it extremely helpful. I know not everyone needs that type of a support. I do. I certainly feel better if I have my support team and my coach in the corner. So that was one aspect of that really mattered, and I think made a difference. The second aspect actually that made probably the biggest difference as well in terms of my physical preparation was just quitting my corporate job and training 2 months nonstop, just focusing solely on training, nutrition, physiotherapy to treat my injuries. And I knew that if I don't do it, the likelihood of winning and the chances of winning, are not going to be as high. So yeah, I just decided to go crazy and take a leap of faith. So that's what I did, and it worked.
How do you find when you're in competition with coaches shouting from the sidelines? So I've done a few competitions, and my daughter has been training now for about 4 or 5 years, and whenever I go to competitions and I hear them on the side, I almost find it's almost American-esque, where you see the dad shouting at the kids on the football field, like screaming at them and then going after the referees and stuff. I find it a little bit a little bit over the top. And plus the fact, I mean, this is from my perspective anyways, that if your coach is telling you what to do and how to get out of something, you're telling the other person what you're doing as well. So I never really got it, if I'm honest.
I didn't necessarily see it from the same perspective. For me, it's empowering because I feel it's like a transfer of energy from my teammates into the maybe kind of more of a mental aspect, that it does translate into how I then push myself through that mental barrier. If I'm in a bad position and I can hear them shouting, it's almost like it gives me some extra energy and extra wish to fight for that goal. So for me, it's again, maybe it's a placebo effect. I'm not quite sure, but it does give me that extra energy, that extra push to go the extra mile, and to do what is required of me. And yes, I know what you mean in terms of the other person overhearing what your coach is telling you to do, but I don't think it has always massive impact on how they're going to react, because sometimes, irrespectively of what they do, they are still going to find themselves in the disadvantageous position after my, let's say, leg over or hand under, whatever that is I'm changing. So I do like to have coaches telling me what to do during the fights. Sometimes I believe in that desire to, when you somehow forget what to do or you freeze for a second, and so that voice is necessary then to guide you further and tell you, hey, don't risk that, or hey, can you just pause for a moment, to be a little bit safer, because they're in charge of the time. So they know how many minutes I've got left, they know how much more I can do, or how many more positions I can go into, and they just weigh the odds, what would be the better solution for me as an athlete, whether I should go for submission, whether I should try to do a takedown or score some points. So in that way, I have a more of an idea what's going on within the match, because I usually have a different perspective. Sometimes I feel like I'm winning, which I'm not. So then they will tell me off and tell me you're losing on points. You have to score the another 2 or 4. So no, for me, I need it and it's helpful. But again, it's an individual thing. So yeah.
What do you do to prepare yourself to go into a competition? Because some people sit themselves back and they stick their headphones on and listen to some thrash metal or something like that. I don't know. They could be listening to Enya or something like that. I don't really know. Or motivational, tracks. What do you do personally to get yourself into the mind frame before you compete?
Yeah, I think again, this is something very individual. So for me, yes, I do listen to music, and I do try to listen to music which is energizing but at the same time relaxing. So something upbeat, but maybe not too heavy. I believe that stress and the element of stress drains the energy. So I like to listen to music I normally dance to. So get into the dancing move that really feels flowy, but it doesn't take the energy out of me. So yeah, something like Latin dance music would do for me. But again, it's completely individual. I think what is important is to listen to music that makes you want to go and fight, and maybe gives you that like an extra boost. But then I also like to do some breath work before competition, because I think at one stage you will start to feel the butterflies, whether you call it anxiety or excitement, which are very similar feelings. You will feel it at one point. So when that happens, again, not to use the energy, not to drain the energy of the system, I use breath work to calm the nervous system down a little bit.
You mentioned, I'm going back a little bit now. You mentioned earlier that you left the corporate world to follow your jiu-jitsu path and your personal training path. How did you find that transition going from a job that I can imagine was quite well paid, to actually going into something that was really kind of, I can imagine, was a bit of a risk to follow what you wanted to do? How did you find that?
Oh, very interesting question. I found it scary, but at the same time, I had that calling, so to say, that I wanted to pursue the dream so much that money didn't matter in that moment. And thankfully, I didn't have responsibilities at the time, that allowed me to make that transition and take that risk. So for me, it wasn't a matter of money. I actually lost all my savings during the transition and had to rebuild it from scratch pretty much, which took a few years to do. But I still wouldn't train it for anything in the world. I think being guided by a passion that is lifelong is in the long term serves better than pursuing something that you can be good at, but not necessarily like your biggest life passion. So I traded passion for money in a way. I do believe though, if you are guided from that internal feeling that this is the right path, eventually, the pieces of the puzzles will come together, or the dots will come together, and actually you will be able to earn money maybe if not bigger than in your previous job. So it's I think it's doable. It's just taking that initial leap.
Talking about the similar lines, moving from Poland to England must have been a bit of a cultural experience for you also.
It was. And now imagine after 15 years, fast forward, I find difficult to transition back.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Do you still have
It's very culturally different.
Do you still have family over in Poland?
I do. So I find it difficult to mingle between the two countries because, yeah, it's culturally very, very different. So obviously 15 years is not a short time. And I think because I've been obviously working for British companies and, you know, I have a lot of English friends, you kind of tend to be like a sponge, just like taking everything in culturally or traditionally or whatnot. And so you kind of become like part of that culture in a way. And then if you want to transition yourself back, I find it like it's almost like outdated for me. So it's interesting. Yeah. I actually forgot what the question was. That was the transition.
No, that was cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a bit of an Americanism here. I'm actually a quarter Polish. So my granddad was from Poland, and he came over to the UK during the Second World War and met my nan. So I've got some Polish blood, I guess, in me. I don't know.
Sounds like it. And you pronounced my name perfectly, so there's got to be something to it.
I don't know. I've got a horrible Birmingham accent still, mixed with Devon, so it's half farmer, half Midlander. So I don't know what that's going to be in translation to doing other languages. I can barely speak English, let alone anything else.
I think it's a matter of motivation. Giving the motivation, everyone can learn. It's, you know, if you I always feel like native English speakers are spoiled to have their language spoken all over the world, pretty much. So there's not much incentive in terms of learning foreign languages.
I've always found it quite interesting, and I've read a few books on language as well. That as English people or Americans, even because you're kind of it's the dominant dialect spoken, taught in schools, that when you go to other countries, you almost expect people to speak the same language as you do. And when you don't, you like, it's not the social norm and you don't really know what to do with yourself. So you end up either speaking slower or just shouting, and they still don't know what you're saying anyway. Languages are one of those things that I've never really embraced. I did the classic thing. I spoke, I did French classes at school, and I've tried to speak a bit of Portuguese when I go surfing in Portugal, or a little bit of Moroccan when I go there. But I always just sound like a typical Brit that's just abroad, and you just sound like an utter idiot when you're doing it.
Oh, I've had some stories from Morocco. I wasn't able to communicate. I had my A levels in French and completely forgotten it. Couldn't speak a word of Arabic. My French wasn't good enough to communicate, so I couldn't even get a taxi to the hotel where I was staying. I actually thought I would stay at the airport and never make it to the surf hotel. So
it's always the way, isn't
you're
it?
not the only one.
I'd like to sort of change the subject a little bit. And when we first started talking back in September, it was kind of the subject that was the head of Jiu-Jitsu, especially in the UK, and that was it was the situation with Jackson Souza and Sam Cook that came out. And we've talked a little bit about women in jiu-jitsu gyms and academies. How do you still feel about that now? It's developed, and it's kind of like not gone under the radar a little bit, but it was talked about for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden it kind of just disappeared. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't think it's, I feel the same way. I felt like it has been ongoing. I mean, that the topic itself has been taken on board by various gyms. And actually, there have been some policies that both Rodger and owners that elevate implemented into the gym. So for example, there are some safeguarding policies now in place where there are people appointed to be the first point of contact if anything is going on in the gym, especially for the for female students. They're especially encouraged to speak out when situations happen that they feel uncomfortable with. So they have someone to talk to, someone, someone from the management team that would then assist them and to maybe just see the case and take it from there. So there's definitely, I personally have seen changes in the gyms. So there's been a lot of discussions, especially from the instructor's perspective. So we had that discussion in every gym that I worked at to make sure that, everyone feels protected and safe. So it's been on a radar. I don't think it's disappeared. This topic is still ongoing. There are certain groups as well that are actually bringing these topics back and discussing it in more depth. I'm not sure if you're following, but some jiu-jitsu female groups are also putting a lot of posts about incidents and trying to expose it to the bigger audience, so these topics do not go unmissed. So that I don't think that the movement necessarily stopped. I think maybe there hasn't been any cases recently to talk about, but if anything comes out that this is being brought back to daylight. So I see a good development in the sense where females are more looked after in the gyms, at least the ones where I work. So I think we as instructors, we have the responsibility to make sure that these policies are in place. So it's up to the individual gyms to implement these strategies, to protect the vulnerable kids, females.
In regard to the sexual harassment, have you ever experienced it yourself? I mean, I've been training nearly 9 years now, and the gyms that I've trained in I've never really seen it or experienced it. Would you say it's kind of like a low percentage infrequent experience, or is it done, do you think, behind closed doors?
Yes, I think it does happen. I think the problem isn't necessarily with how often, but how are the females responding? I have experienced that myself, and I was too young to respond in an appropriate way, so I didn't make a big deal out of it. I actually just said to one person, "Oh, this happened," but I said it in a way that didn't really sound dramatic, which I guess I shouldn't have. I should have made a big deal out of it, because it was a big deal actually at that time, because it almost put me off training. If it happened a bit later in my life, maybe in my 20s or 30s, I probably would have reacted differently. So I think the most important thing for us as instructors is to make sure that these females are being given voices that are not being disregarded. And because I didn't probably feel I have someone to talk to at that moment in time, I feel scared and embarrassed to talk about it.
I mean, again, I'm talking from an outsider looking in, really. Do you think this is more frequent, sort of like, a few years ago when jiu-jitsu hasn't been so popular, and like you say, you've got 50 plus women training where you are now? I don't mean this to sound in a bad way, but it's harder to get away with now, because
yes,
there's so many eyes looking in,
yes,
so many people together, and sexual harassment and equality and diversity is definitely on people's forefronted minds as well, especially with the evolution of generations, and people's perceptions are changing as well.
I think you're right. This is also my impression and my observation throughout the years. Like it was much easier for a situation like this to just not see daylight, because these people wouldn't report it. But now, since we have so many females training together, these voices are louder, and so we feel more empowered also as a group, because there's so many females training. We can talk about it, and then we can inspire each other to talk about it openly and share it on social media, so that it's more exposure. So people are definitely, I mean, that's my hope, but this is also my observation, that this is more more transparent.
When people talk about women empowerment, what's your perspective on that? Is it them having have more of a voice? Is it being more in the public eye, so that becoming a public figure, a little bit like yourself? You're in the forefront of the public eye every now and again, and you're on the platform where you can put your opinions across, and people can relate to that or not. How do you see what women empowerment is?
I think it's all of these that you mentioned, and probably for me personally, having grown up in a society that didn't always approve of the female voice. Perhaps it was also about taking away that good girl, I call it good girl conditioning, and just being assertive enough to speak your own truth rather than trying not to be rude. Because a lot of the times females feel like, I think especially in females, we do never want to come across as aggressive or rude, and therefore we sometimes undermine the situations of what's happening to us, and we choose not to speak where it would be advisable to do so. That also pertains to the self-defense scenarios I talk about a lot in the workshops, and how assertiveness and de-escalation itself can play a major role in avoiding conflict altogether rather than going into physical battle with someone. So I always try to teach females and make them understand that the way they react and the way they create their boundaries, it's crucial, in a way that it can actually take them away from danger, from conflict. So I think it's in something in that social environment that we wanted to abide by, that, let's say, a rule that we have to always play accordingly, never judge, never be the fighters to accuse anyone of anything. I think this is within our power. So when I talk about women empowerment, it's talking about giving ourselves the voice, yes, not just to speak out, but also to feel confident enough to speak out publicly about these things.
I feel definitely having a daughter that it's changed my perspective on things a lot more. And I almost feel, I mean, even with schools, boys and girls are very different in their social interactions. How boys and men interact with each other and how women interact with each other. The brain chemistry and all that sort of thing is, even though physiologically we're the same, chemically and mentally, the way that we think is quite different as well. And it's not one of my worries, but it's all kind of on the back of my brain very much. How my daughter is going to react to situations and social pressures in the future. And definitely, now that both sexes and equality between sexes and nationalities, different races, are definitely aligning a lot more. I think perspectives and perceptions are changing a lot more to be positive. And also, the ability to be able to get help and ask for help and talk about things, it is a lot more on the forefront of people's mind, especially with mental health these days. I think that there's a lot more benefits for her growing up than probably what we had.
I agree. Also, what he said about genetical differences, that's one, but also the social conditioning is the second factor, which is perhaps from my perspective even greater than the genetical differences, because there's so much of the conditioning that you can change, and I don't want to say reprogram, but yeah, let's just stick with the word change, because effectively what you're doing, if you sign up a child to, say, a jiu-jitsu class, you will see the transformation within months. Most of the time I used to teach kids, and I saw that from the shyest person in a group, you'd see the most outgoing within a year of training, for example. That's depending on the age group, but you will see a massive transition in how they behave, how they relate to others, how they feel empowered and confident, assertive, and it's just a bunch of whole things that that you can change. It's within our power as caretakers, teachers, to be able to change that narrative from, oh, you shouldn't say anything, you just stay in a corner and stay quiet, but into something that will give them voice and they won't be scared to talk. So definitely that aspect is also important to mention, and I've seen it happen, so I know it's viable. It's possible to change it.
That's one of the things I'm looking forward to the most. Is I'm going on a surfing trip mid-March, And when I get back, I'm opening my classes up to children as well for different age groups. And I definitely see the transition where my daughter trains at the moment, and her confidence levels are through the roof. Unfortunately, she's in a school with a lot of alpha females, so they bounce off each other quite heavily. But I'm definitely going to be interested in to see how the kids change from when they come and start to how they progress. It's something interesting for me, and I really enjoy the cognitive relationships and how people change through doing something like this. I mean, what's your view on having something like jiu-jitsu introduced into schools?
I think it would be one of the best things, either self-defense or jiu-jitsu. There's something specifically interesting about jiu-jitsu itself, perhaps because of close physical contact. And I think this is something ingrained in humans, and we kind of strayed away from it in today's world. We used to live in communities where people would hug and dance a lot. Right now, unless you're a dancer, you don't want to necessarily engage in much physical contact with strangers or even people close within your community. So it does give you like a hormonal boost because of the oxytocin as well, but also feeling as part of a community. So you feel physical and mental closeness to these people you're interacting with. So essentially, I think that it has major health benefits, not just mental, not just physical, but also psychological. And you've seen it. You've seen it in your daughter. I'm sure you'll see it in more kids that you are about to teach, that they will change their behavioral patterns, but also the way they think will change. I think it would be an amazing idea to do that. UAE have done it already, and they have really great groups of kids training there. As far as I'm aware, it's mandatory for boys and it's optional for girls. So something like this could be definitely implemented in the UK or anywhere really, and I think huge benefits would come from it.
Yeah, I'd like to see if I could try and develop something like that. I'm in that situation in my life now where I'm transitioning out of the military and I'm coming in to be what I keep calling a normal person, a civilian, a normal person. I don't know. And I've got lots of these little ideas that are in my head that are firing off. And I'm just like, how do I do this? How do I do that? But I think sometimes I'm just trying to do too much too soon. And it's kind of a little bit overwhelming,
I can relate. Well, taking small steps is definitely going to help, but starting sooner rather than later is good as well. A lot of people are scared of starting to teach because they feel like they don't have enough experience. And I feel like there's no good or bad moment to start. Just starting sooner is always going to be beneficial for both you and your students because you then will acquire those skills. So starting as early as you can is a good idea as well.
Yeah, I feel I'm been quite lucky really because from my job in the Marines, I was a physical training instructor. So one of my jobs is coaching, mentoring, as well as keeping people fit. And for probably the last 5 or 6 years, I've been coaching jiu-jitsus in whatever gyms I've been running. So it seemed a little bit daft when I decided, when I was leaving and someone just said to me, "You're a good coach. Why don't you coach?" And I was like, "Do you know what? I am." And then, within 2 weeks, I was looking at shop fronts. I was looking at units to like get all matted areas out. And they're like, no, start small first, get people turning up and then build it from there. I was already thinking about building like 7,000 square feet of academies. And yeah, I was nowhere near that yet.
It's true. Having that vision though shouldn't, hinder you from starting small. So the vision will come to fruition when the time is right, but starting small is definitely the way to go as well if you don't have the space. And it will, when I look from that perspective of 15 years ago when I first came here and then just zooming out to where I am now, like I never imagined I would get here where I would have 50 females training in one gym. It was unimaginable. I never believed that would happen. So it was beyond my vision. So that's one of the things that can actually surprise people the most is they have a vision, but actually what they start doing can actually become much bigger than what they think. So
yeah, that's the dream, I guess you could say, couldn't
you? Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about MMA. So I know that you've had one or two MMA fights. How come you didn't continue with it?
Oh God, it was very long time ago, and it was one of my crazy projects. I just always wanted to try it out, and so I did. But I didn't feel that it was a passion I wanted to pursue, predominantly because of injuries, the risk of injuries, and I just felt like I want to be a healthy human till the end of my life, pretty much. And that damage, just physical damage, didn't seem too exciting for me at the time. At the time, it wasn't well paid, so it didn't make much financial sense at all. But it was exciting to try it out. I don't regret it. I had a great time. Um, so it was very short lived, really.
When I was trying to research and trying to find videos of you doing it, I only came up with Joanna Ziobronowicz, and I was like, no, I don't want that one. I want the Joanna that's going to be on my podcast. Where do you see jiu-jitsu going in the future? You know, we talked a little bit about the growth of it, but it is like one of the fastest growing sports in the world at the moment. You know, a lot of people want to get involved. There seems to be a lot of white belts and blue belts, early purple belts, but the higher ranks, especially where I am, you know, they're far and few between. So where do you see jiu-jitsu going at the moment?
No, I believe it will keep growing the way it is. I think everyone's starting to realize the benefits that jiu-jitsu has, and so there will be more and more black belts in the country. I mean, comparing to, I'll just give you an example to maybe try to picture what the differences was 15 years ago when I first started. My teacher was a white belt. We The highest belt in the country was a purple belt, and we had Roy Harris come from California to do seminars in Poland. So literally nobody had a clue what jiu-jitsu was. People were trying to learn from each other and from YouTube videos or those Pride cassettes. And yeah, we hadn't had a clue. So that's why it was partially why I expatriated. Now, when you look at Polish competitors, they're one of the best in the world with hundreds and hundreds of black belts. You get black belts in every city pretty much right now teaching. Even in small villages, you'll have either brown or purple belts teaching at least. So that exponential growth, you will see it everywhere, I believe, not just in Poland, but pretty much in every country that has taken jiu-jitsu on boards. And I see it coming to the UK in the same way. So yeah, watch this space. It will get bigger. And yeah, you might be surprised where you get in a few years' time.
Well, I've been trying to spread the word because I live in like a little Devonshire village next to the estuary going into the channel, and I've put a load of posters up, and I'm trying to push that jiu-jitsu is for everybody. And I've come up to the old cliche of trying to explain to people what it is. And you know, like, people are saying, oh, I used to do karate and taekwondo, and you know, trying to explain it's a bit like judo where you take people to the ground and then you're doing ground fighting with some submissions and stuff. They kind of look at you and they go, nah, that just sounds a bit too violent for me. And I'm like, does it? I'm really not doing it justice here. I should have like the one liner that you put down there to try and explain it to people. What would your one liner be?
Well, I think what you said at the beginning is very much on point, where you're talking about the gentle art. So the smaller person being able to tackle a bigger opponent using leverage and chokeholds is the most, well, for me at least, from a female perspective, is very appropriate because it gives anyone the idea that there is something you can do without, you know, killing each other and sparring. But also, I always refer to jiu-jitsu as human chess, because it's very challenging, and not just physically. Well, obviously physicality is part of it, but also in the way that jiu-jitsu is in an endless fashion. You keep learning. So there's never an end to the amount of techniques you can do, to the different positions you can do. And it's constantly developing, and it's something that is most fascinating. And when I say it, when I explain like that to females, they're very intrigued. When that you have to strategize in order to, you know, have some options in the fight, and that, yeah, you have to use your brain, not just the body.
Like it. What are your goals for the future? You expressed earlier that you were looking to compete again. You know, have you got any sort of long-term, short-term goals that you're looking to do?
I do. I think competition is going to be on my agenda, but more like a hobby. I'm currently focusing on organizing Jiu-Jitsu yoga retreats. So this is the biggest one probably for me this year. Going to organize retreats in Tenerife and in the UK. And again, combining that holistic approach really towards training. So a bit of relaxation, breathing, and Jiu-Jitsu. But also the second part of what I'm going to do this year is focusing more on the self-defense aspect as well. So I've been delivering workshops to companies, to schools, and I'm just actually learning more about psychology of self-defense and really diving more into the topic to be able to help others also and build a course, bigger course in that area as well. So these are two areas of focus for this year. Anything else might come up, I don't know, but that's my plan at least.
Beautiful. Well, Joanna, I'd like to finish the podcast off, and I've not done this before with people that I talk to Jiu-Jitsu about, so that you're going to be the test pilot. So I'm going to do a quick fire round, see how this goes. So the first question is, and what is your favorite hierarchy position?
Back takes.
Your best sweep?
Flower sweep, pendulum sweep, or helicopter sweep. There are different names to it.
Like you say, there's no single way that you can do things. There's no single name for things either.
Correct.
Your favorite submission?
Armbar.
Gi or no gi?
Oh, that is a hard question to answer, but at this moment in time, it's going to be no gi.
Talking about competitions, submission only or time limit and points?
Submission only.
Joanna, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and I've really enjoyed your stories and your perspectives.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks. And that's it. If you like the podcast, please like, share, and subscribe on your podcast provider, and leave a little review on Apple Podcasts if you listen to it there. Thanks for listening.